As promised, I have for you today the top 6 reasons why people assume you left the church and the top 6 reasons why you probably did. Today I have my husband here, Jared, helping me read this list. Jared, thanks for being here today in your own house. Thank you. Quick disclaimer. This list that we came up with was based on our own kind of experience and friends and different things that we've seen. It is not all-encompassing, representing all Mormons and ex-Mormons, and it's not based on any statistics. On the list of why people assume you left the church, number 6 is you were offended. You were offended. Probably by someone in your congregation, by your bishop, by your Relief Society president, your visiting teacher. Someone horribly offended you to the point that you said, you know what? Screw God. I just can't handle.
I think this can be said about a lot of the reasons people assume that you leave the church is that they're petty reasons. Yeah. Being offended.
Yes.
If you live in the one true church and you get offended by something that a random person says, or even that a leader says, and you leave it, even though it's the one true church, that's kind of petty and stupid. And I think that members will oftentimes
rationalize.
They'll claim that, they were just offended because there can only be petty reasons to leave the church.
Because if it's the true church, there's no good reason to leave, so we have to assume it was something petty. No diss on them, they're just kind of taught that way, so it's like, that's how it's going to come across. I know I thought that for a long time. I still think that.
Real reason that you leave the church. Number 6. Church culture.
Church culture. That encompasses so many things.
Yeah, I've met a lot of people that have left because of the culture of the church.
Just that vibe of just the judgmentalness, the perfectionist, the guilt, the shame. It's all encompassed in that culture. And a lot of people will say like, oh, well, it's an imperfect church culture because people are imperfect, but the church isn't imperfect. But it's like, well, but the perfect church is creating this culture, right?
That's something that another thing members will always say is the church is perfect, the people are not, so that they can blame, they can kind of blame losing members on the members that they currently have rather than blaming it on the church, because it can't be the fault of the organization itself, because then maybe there's something wrong that needs to be changed with it. And I've always hated that saying that the church is perfect, the people are not, because I like the people. That they're my friends and family. They're all great people.
And they're all trying to do good things. They really are.
But it bothers me when they get blamed for me being offended and leaving the church.
Yes, absolutely. I'm totally with you. All right, reason number 5. A big assumption that people will assume you left the church is because you are lazy. You just can't handle the commitment that this church requires of going to church, going to the temple, of having a calling, of reading your scriptures all the time, of praying all the time. Gosh, how exhausting it is to pray all the time.
It is a big level of commitment. The Mormon Church, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
How dare you?
I mean, it's all about commitment, and the commitment is what retains the membership. It's I guess 2 hours of church every Sunday. There's extra meetings on Sunday. There's a whole list of seemingly arbitrary rules that you have to obey. There's
mutual. Your callings can take you away from your family during days of the week. There's seminary once a day, temple attendance that you're kind of guilted into.
It's a lot.
Mission service. Church college, all of these things can just kind of bombard you in it. And yeah, it is a big commitment.
But the members will assume, like, you just weren't cut out for it. Like, this church asks a lot of its members. You just couldn't handle it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a shallow reason to assume, like, oh, I was just too lazy to be committed. Like, I would rather just sleep more, because that's what I do with synagogue. I would rather sleep more than be committed to God. And it's just an insulting reason to assume someone left, is what it comes down to. In honesty, growing up in this church, I liked that there was extra commitment compared to other Christian churches. Because I felt like if you believe that your church is true, then it should be involved in your whole life. And this church does that. So I feel like there's, integrity in that. Because they do believe it's a full church, so they really commit to it. I think it's a cool thing. But again, I'm just not there right now, so.
Reason number 5 that people actually leave the church: temples.
Temples.
More specifically, temple ceremony.
I always loved the temple. I really did. Like, even though even though the weirdness of it all, I always loved it. Of course, the endowment was always probably my least favorite ordinance. But that was partly just because it's so long.
Yeah, well, once the weirdness wears off, it's just boring. But the weirdness never really wears off.
Yeah, well,
Especially when you walk in and see, like, one of your friends in a goofy getup, and
you're
they
just
want to
like,
have, like,
I
a full
can't
conversation with you. And I'm like, I can't take you seriously right now. You look weird as hell.
Yeah, that's rough. Yes, so it's definitely a core issue with a lot of people who leave the church. And I mean, I guess we should mention too that for people who do leave the church, it's not usually just one of these reasons. It's usually several, if not all.
Yeah.
So.
Well, in the temple, it's kind of, I would say, the number one reason why other people call the Mormon Church a cult. Because it does seem kind of a culty, weird ritual. I remember my first time going in. I was looking around at everyone doing their weird stuff and saying their weird things. And I was like, oh, we are a cult.
I get it now.
I still thought it was true. I was like, oh, it doesn't mean it's not true, but it just means that a cult is true. And
it's a true cult.
It's completely different from anything you've ever been taught. It feels like a different church once you go to the temple. And they urge you to make a bunch of commitments and covenants that they didn't even warn you about beforehand.
Yeah. It can just be overwhelming to someone who doesn't really know what they're getting into. It can just feel intense.
Nobody knows what they're getting into.
Well, I mean, but for some people it will be upsetting, and others, I let it roll off. It's a true cult, so we're good. Okay. Reason number 4 of why people assume you left the church is you wanted to sin or keep your tithing money or have fun.
Keeping your tithing money that's a good reason to leave.
Well, not according to Mormons, obviously.
According to common sense.
Oh, man.
Wanting to sin, I've known people that have wanted to sin. They don't leave the church. They just sin. They're called Jack Mormons. I know a lot of Jack Mormons that get drunk on the weekends and have sex with anyone they want to. But then if you say something like, yeah, that Joseph Smith married a 14-year-old, they'll get mad. They'll you bagging on my prophet, bud?
Right. Nope.
So those are Jack Mormons they're thinking of.
Yes.
Nobody changes their mind about a worldview. Like, I can't think of anybody who's changed their mind on an absolute truth.
Right, or a philosophy.
Because they wanted to get drunk.
It's just another reason it feels insulting to someone when these reasons are assumed that you left. So, I'm with you.
Reason number 4. Why people actually leave the church. And it's due to discrimination of LGBT people. Specifically, we've been seeing over the last few years that November policy in 2015 that was just revoked. So all you people should come back.
Oh, no. So...
They didn't say no take-backsies.
I think there's a growing number of members in the church who are supportive of gay people, but when it comes to the doctrine, they're just like, meh, whatever. It's a weird thing. It's definitely a shift that I think is causing damage to the church because I mean, that was a core issue for me growing up, is that in St. Louis I had a lot of gay friends, and I'm just like, I just don't see God caring about this. So it's a legit reason that, you know, really does pull people away and kind of question, like, wait a second, like, if God doesn't, you know, if I don't think this is a big deal, why would God think it's a big deal, and kind of leads them.
Well, and even if he does care about it, I was never convinced that he could care about it enough to force it upon other people. Because when I was in high school, Proposition 8 was a big thing in California. And, you know, we're over in Idaho, and I had friends that were like, hey, do you want to go to the church activity this evening? We're gonna be making calls to random people who live in California, convincing them to vote yes on Prop 8. And I was like, I don't live in California. I don't care what they do for their laws. Also, even at the time, I still thought it was a sin, but I can't tell people not to sin. I didn't want to, like, I never wanted to legislate alcohol consumption. Why would I want to legislate homosexuality?
Right. If God wants us to have agency, right, it's like, you know, are you really being a good person if you're forced to do what's right or whatever, right? So, yeah. Okay.
Reason number 3 people assume you left the church is you read anti-Mormon materials. I still don't think I've read any anti-Mormon materials.
And you read what would be considered anti-Mormon materials.
Because
especially
it's funny,
years back.
Yeah, right, because there's been a transition of what is considered anti-Mormon materials now.
Well, there's less and less that can be hidden now.
Exactly.
And with the church, it's kind of a damage control issue now. They're trying to act like, oh, this has been here. We've been forthcoming with this information the whole time. The gospel topic essays is something they're trying to do, and things that are in the gospel topics essays would have been considered anti-Mormon lies when I was a kid.
Yeah.
It's things that the September 6th got excommunicated for.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, so much of what has, I guess, led me to my decision has been just what I view as information about what actually happened in this founding of this church. Is that anti-Mormon? It is, I guess, if it draws you away from the church, so.
Facts don't have an agenda.
They do if they're pulling you away from the true church. Then they're anti-facts.
Because if somebody tells you, well, Joseph Smith married a 14-year-old, that's a fact. The fact that happened is indisputable, and it doesn't have an agenda. So, reason number 3 why you actually leave the church is sexism and racism. With sexism, women obviously aren't allowed to have the priesthood. And everyone kind of knows there's... You always feel there's like an inequality there, and it's kind of on the back of your head. So since it's on the back of everyone's head, they kind of think, how are we gonna mitigate this? So I think what they generally do is like you said, put women up on a pedestal.
You're too good for this.
Yeah, you're too righteous. You don't need the priesthood.
Right.
So they'll, which honestly would be insulting to me if I were a woman. That if somebody expected me to buy that nonsense answer, like, hey, how come you didn't give me the superpowers that everyone else has? Well, you're just too good for them. You don't need them.
Thank you.
But also, they then turn around and not only will they put women up on the pedestal, they'll crap on men. You go to any
priesthood meeting.
Yeah, any priesthood meeting, they're always talking about how you're looking at too much porn or you're masturbating too much or whatever. And then you go to women's session and Quentin L. Cook gave that talk that's LDS women are amazing. Yeah. So you're telling your men that they're pieces of crap while telling your women that they're amazing so that they'll ignore the fact that you're not giving them the superpowers that you gave into the piece of crap men.
Well, I think some people would argue saying that women aren't treated that way because there's a lot of perfectionism in the church. But I will say that from the perspective of a man talking to a man, there's definitely a different attitude than a man talking to a woman. Because a man talking to a group of women is always going to want to be more uplifting. I think a man talking to a group of men is going to be like, gotta man up, men. Gotta be men. So I think that's where that comes in. But then there's also the idea that, like, within the church of just women, you have to be perfect. You're striving for perfection, but you'll never get it. But you'll never be good enough until you get it. And it's just this very damaging circle. So, yeah. Reason number 2 that people assume you left the church, you were led by Satan. You were deceived by Satan. He tricked you. And now, instead of following the word of God, you are literally being led by the devil to your own destruction and horribleness. And you will never, ever be truly happy. Ever.
Which is even more insulting because you were warned your entire life about how Satan
could
works.
You not see it coming?
He just slowly tempts you down to oblivion.
He wraps you with chains slowly.
Mm-hmm.
Slowly. But yes, just another very insulting reason. Not saying all Mormons assume that, but it's a lot that will assume that you are deceived by Satan, because this church is for everyone. And if you're not in this church, you are in the church of the devil.
And that's an incredibly simplistic view on why people change their minds about big things like the veracity of a church.
Yes.
I know the church is true. Morgan left it. It must have been, I don't know, some superpowered demon that told her that it wasn't true. And
tricked her.
Yeah.
Just like Eve.
So, reason number 2 why people actually leave the church is church history.
So much encompassed in that. Joseph Smith, polygamy, Brigham Young, Book of Abraham, the Book of Mormon. Did I ever say the Book of Mormon?
Nope.
So much. Just the foundation of the church. There's so much there that just doesn't sit right with people. It just doesn't. Doesn't mean that the church is all bad today, but it also kind of takes the church off its pedestal a little bit. Mm-hmm. Where if you view it as another church, you don't want to be a part of it if you don't like the rules and things like that, because if it's just another church, it's not something you're obligated to.
Yeah, I'd say out of church history, the number 1 reason that people leave the church is probably polygamy. Mm-hmm. Within the context of church history.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And not so much the fact that, men and women married several men and women.
Right, but the way it was carried out.
Yeah, how it happened.
Manipulatively.
The fact that it happened with 14-year-old girls.
Right. Promising salvation.
Yeah.
And just the manipulative tactics and just very degrading practices. And
how they don't even generally follow their own rules. Like, we're going to take another wife, she had to be a virgin. Or even the reason you're taking another wife is because, she's a widow and she can't, fend for herself. Well, then why would you send men away on missions and then marry their wives?
Right. Now, to be fair, I think other people would argue, you're taking care of that wife while her husband's gone. But at the same time, sometimes they were even marrying women whose husbands were still there.
Taking care of that wife, like, in all the ways. Yeah. Yeah, that's my first thought. You're like, well, the prophet wants me to go on a mission, but who's going to screw my wife while I'm gone? I think Joseph Smith's brain was just one constant poorly acted porn.
Gosh, it just makes me think of that video game that you were playing.
Assassin's Creed.
Assassin's Creed.
I'm too old to satisfy my wife.
If only someone could come along and take care of her. All right, so moving on. Number 1, the final reason that people assume that you left the church is because you were never truly converted. You never really had a testimony, because then you had nothing to lose, right? If you never really had a testimony, then you would never stay.
Well, it's sort of a double comfort to them, because if it's a parent thinking, well, he never really had a testimony, then he's not going to be held as accountable. He's not sinning against that great light that he would be if he had known for sure that the gospel was true. Right. It's also a comfort in them knowing that, well, the only reason somebody could possibly leave is if they didn't know it was true in the first place. To begin with,
right. So it's like, that makes sense. They just never knew that it was true. so they didn't feel compelled to stay. If they knew it was true, they wouldn't leave. I mean, true, right?
Yeah.
So,
which can be very insulting to people who, spent
months or years of agony and tears and pain and trying to decide what to do.
Mm-hmm.
This is not usually an easy decision, and that's why...
Well, it shouldn't be.
This is a difficult decision, and looking at this list of reasons that a lot of people assume you leave, it hurts. It really does. It hurts when you're on the other end because you feel like, how could people think of me so shallowly? Now, again, that's not all Mormons who think that way, but it's a lot. It's out there a lot, those ideas, so.
Reason number one, when people leave the church, they do not believe that it is the one true church.
Mm-hmm.
They don't believe in the truth claims, to use the ex-Mormon verbiage.
Yes. And I think that's a lot of things that Mormons don't get is they think you're sinning against the greater light, or you're just turning your back on God, or all these things, and it's like you just don't think that it's the one true church. And because you think that, you don't feel compelled to go or to be held to these standards that you just don't feel good about.
I remember on my mission one time, I had to give this sort of lesson to a bunch of other missionaries in a big meeting, and I remember I thought this was going to be inspirational. I really did. I took the number of humans on Earth and divided it by the number of Mormons on record to
0.
just see the
whatever percent.
Yeah, to see the likelihood of, like, man, you should be so grateful that you were born into the church because it's so unlikely that you would be born into this church. And I thought I was going to inspire people. I didn't end up presenting it because I said it to myself and I was like, oh, yeah, it's really
minuscule.
It's really unlikely that I would be in this church. So that was kind of my first sort of delving into, well, it's unlikely that there is a one true church.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I hope you guys enjoyed this list that we put together. Again, this is not representative of all Mormons or all ex-Mormons. The choice to leave or to stay in this church is a very personal thing. I think it should always be treated that way. But this was just for us to put out there to kind of have some laughs about some of the things that are assumed in our situation or what we've seen in our lives. If you guys liked this, please like and subscribe. Drop some comments below on why people assumed you left, or any funny stories related to that. And yeah, I thank you guys so much, and thank you, Jared, for your help today, and I'm sure I'll be talking to you guys again soon.